Hi, my name is Andrew Hsieh. I'm from the Fred Hutch and UW in Seattle, Washington. I'd like to thank Davide, Tom, and Rachel, and Yvonne for giving me the opportunity to present some of the research in my laboratory. Today I'm going to highlight a story that unexpectedly finds a critical link between the androgen receptor, which is a transcription factor, and the translation initiation process mediated through 4-EBP1. And this is very important for a particular disease phenotype. The disease I'm going to focus today on is prostate cancer. And just a quick crash course in this. Many patients have this, many people in the United States have this, and it's a significant cause of morbidity and mortality. And one important thing to know about this disease is that it is significantly addicted, at least in the initial stages, to the androgen receptor and androgen receptor signaling, which is mediated through testosterone or androgen. And so what this looks like in a patient with metastatic disease is, first, they end up having tumors that grow. And what was discovered over 50 years ago is that this androgen dependence can actually be therapeutically targeted by depriving a patient of androgens. Initially through physical castration, now we have medicines to do that. But it turns out, work over the past 20 years has shown that what happens after that is tumors continue to grow. And there's a re-engagement of the androgen receptor in that context. And what happened as a result of that is there have been second-generation therapeutics that could target androgen receptor and androgen biosynthesis, and that's actually improved lifespan for patients with some of the most aggressive disease in prostate cancer. Now that happened around 2010, and what we're seeing now is that there is actually a rise of deaths after these therapeutics. And what we're seeing is a new group of prostate cancer patients that no longer have the androgen receptor, or very low levels of this. And so our laboratory has really been interested in understanding the mechanisms of persistent tumor growth in that context and whether or not there are other therapeutic modalities that we can use to target this very advanced stage, lethal prostate cancer. So in order to do that, we decided to use a mouse model of prostate cancer developed by Hong Wu. In this mice, in a prostate-specific manner, can lose PTEN through a Cre recombinase, and then it develops early-stage prostate cancer. But it turns out, in order to make it into a late-stage one, all we had to do was actually castrate the mouse, which decreases the androgen levels. And what we saw was that this significantly increases tumor burden, which at a cellular level is reflected by increased Ki67 cell proliferation. And when we looked at AR levels, the androgen receptor, we saw a significant decrease in the androgen receptor, which is also reflected in RNA-seq analysis, which I'm not going to show you, at the transcript level. So this raises the important question of what mediates this pro-proliferation phenotype in the context of low AR. So one of the prevailing dogmas in the field is that AR negatively regulates the PI3K pathway. So if you remove AR, that would, if this were true, you would see an increase in PI3K activity as measured, for instance, by phosphorylation AKT. So we went ahead and looked at phosphorylation AKT using quantitative immunofluorescence. And what we saw was not an increase in phospholipid AKT, but actually a decrease. And we actually looked at the other site, T308, and we didn't see an increase either. So this can't explain our phenotype. We instead take a step back and ask, okay, what's actually happened to the process of protein synthesis when a prostate cancer progresses to AR low state? So we went ahead and conducted an in vivo pure myosinylation assay on our post-castrate tissues. And what we found there, not surprisingly, was actually a 30% increase in de novo protein synthesis as measured on a per cell basis, looking at over 40,000 cells. So then, of course, the question is, what's driving increased protein synthesis? And so for that, we were actually inspired by work from Yvonne and Nahum, basically demonstrating that the 4-EBP, or the EIF4F complex, might be very important for the proliferative state of cells. And so what we decided to do was quantitative immunofluorescence on all the EIF4F components, including 4-EBP1. And when we did that, we were surprised to find that there were no changes in EIF4A, E, or G, but we did see a significant decrease in 4-EBP1 levels. Now, at first we thought, okay, this is just one mouse model. Maybe it's just specific to this. What about other models? So we decided to look in the human prostate cancer cell line. We saw that the same occurrence happening there as well. We also looked at 29 patient-derived xenografts. And what we saw was a positive correlation between AR protein levels and 4-EBP1 protein levels. So this is a correlative finding demonstrating that AR levels seem to positively track with 4-EBP1 levels. But is it causal? Does AR actually regulate 4-EBP1? To address this question, we considered three possibilities. We first looked at the translation efficiency of of 4-EBP1, we didn't see any difference. We looked at 4-EBP1 degradation and didn't see any difference as well. This led, of course, to the transcription regulation of 4-EBP1. We saw in all three of our models there was a significant decrease at the mRNA levels of 4-EBP1. Now, is this sensitive to the presence of ligand? In order to address that question, we went ahead and created organoid models, primary organoid models for my mouse, and added back the ligand, which would re-engage the androgen receptor. And we did that. That was able to completely rescue the decrease in 4-EBP1 mRNA levels. Now, of course, that then suggested AR might directly impact this transcription, so we did AR ChIP-seq. And when we did that, what we found was that there is indeed an AR ChIP-seq peak in the first intron of 4-EBP1. And we went ahead and cloned this thing out into a luciferase reporter construct and found that indeed it was AR sensitive. Now, the androgen response element is not 300 bases, it's actually 15 bases. So we went ahead and mutated the 15 bases, and that significantly blunted the response, demonstrating that AR controls 4-EBP1 at the transcript level through an intron encoded within, through an ARE encoded within the first intron. So then this sets the stage. Does this have an impact on EIF4F dynamics? Went ahead and optimized the proximity ligation assay where we look at the on-complex 4E and 4G, or 4E, 4EBP1, and we saw that indeed in the castrate setting we see a net increase in EIF4F complex formation. So then the question is whether or not this net increase in EIF4F complex formation is important for this proliferative state. And so we went ahead and used the mouse model that I had generated when I was in Davide Ruggiero's laboratory, where we could inducibly inhibit EIF4F complex formation in a tissue-specific manner just by adding doxycycline to the drinking water. We used the proximity ligation assay to validate that we're actually affecting the EIF4F complex. And we did that in an initiation experiment. We saw that it had a significant impact on the tumor size as well as the proliferative state of the cell, demonstrating that EIF4F complex is actually necessary for AI-low prostate cancer initiation. Of course, the major question after that is what is EIF4F actually controlling downstream to actually orchestrate aberrant proliferation? To answer that question, we utilized ribosome profiling in the tissues, and we were able to capture ribosome-bound mRNAs and compare it to total RNA. And what we found there was that there were about 697 genes that were significantly upregulated compared to the non-castrate controls. And we did gene set enrichment analysis. One of our top hits was cell proliferation. So we wanted to validate that these were actually AR sensitive and 4-EBP sensitive. So we went back to our primary cell models and we went ahead in the castrate setting. We saw that three particular genes, KLF5, which is a transcription factor, DNR, which is a translation regulator, as well as a CDK regulator, CalCul1, are all significantly increased at the protein level upon castration, but decrease when you inhibit EIF4F complex. We didn't see any changes at the mRNA level. And at a functional level, when we knock down each one of these genes, this has significant impact on S-phase incorporation of EDU into the primary cells. So this really set the stage for the possibility that EIF4F complex might be a druggable target in the context of AR-low prostate cancer. So in order to study this, at least on a petri dish, what we decided to do was use two compounds that are available. One that was developed in Jerry Peltier's lab, and the other one in Gerhard Wagner's lab, called 4E2R-CAT and 4E-GI1. And what we saw was that cells that were castrate or had no androgens, those were uniquely sensitive to the inhibitory effects of these 4E and 4G inhibitors. And what we wanted to make sure was that we were actually blocking complex formation, so we adapted our proximity ligation assay to the cells as well. And we can see here nicely is that in no treatment, we do see that increased 4E, 4G, and this is significantly squashed by these drugs. So in summary, our working model is this. AR appears to bind to an androgen response element within the locus of 4-EBP1, which drives its transcription. This increases its levels and thereby tamps down on EIF4F activity, and which can have a negative impact on a pro-proliferation regulon. Now, in the context of an emerging form of prostate cancer where AR levels are low, it needs to find new ways to grow. So in that particular context, you see that 4-EBP1 levels go down, EIF4 activity goes up, and we see increase in this proliferation regulon, which drives the increased growth that we see in the tissues. This is androgen-independent growth. This particular process can be reversed by using small molecule inhibitors of the 4E, 4G interaction. So in our lab, we're answering more questions related to this right now. One in particular is to understand the regulatory code that determines AR, EIF4F translation sensitivity. And we have some interesting findings within the 5' UTR for that. And we're also wanting to see whether or not this really works in patient-derived xenografts. So we're currently conducting those studies as well. So I want to thank you for listening to my talk. The two drivers of this program so far has been Yuzhen Liu and Jesse Horn, which were two outstanding technicians in my laboratory. They also had help with other people in my lab. I also want to thank the Nelson Lab for providing us the AR null prostate cancer line, as well as the Primate Lab for plasmids that we used to prove that there is an AR responsive element within the locus of 4E-BP1. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Questions?
So based on this data, the 4E-BP2 and BP3 don't change because data.
2 and 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't checked. We did a Western on 4E-BP2, and we didn't see any change there. 4E-BP3, I have not looked yet.
So this element in the intron was described before, or you're the first one to describe it?
We're the first one to describe it.
So Andrew, over here.
Yes.
So the androgen receptor is also translationally regulated by 4F. So it's surprising you don't see recovery of that. Any understanding of why that's excluded?
At least in our system right here, I think what's really happening is without the androgens, you actually have a very low, without the androgens, one of the ways that the protein stabilizes is by dimerization when androgen hits it. And so without that, I don't think you're going to have the necessary components to actually prevent the degradation process. So I think in that context, degradation wins. Other models are somewhat, albeit contrived, because we literally got rid of AR, so we wouldn't expect that to increase.
Nice.
It's like a lab meeting.
No, it's very nice. So is there any cell type, as you know, specificity in terms of luminal or basal or stem cells that rely more on this mechanism and the dose of protein synthesis?
Exactly. No, we were really surprised because we actually had, Sadaf and I had published a paper some time ago demonstrating that there seems to be cell type specificity in terms of response to EI4E activity. We saw that in the non-castrate setting. In the castrate setting, surprisingly, it seems to be both cell types, basal and luminal, seem to be equally affected. And we actually did like a competition experiment. I knew you were going to ask this question. No,
it's like a lab meeting, I'm telling you.
We did a quick competition experiment. We actually compared the non-castrate setting to castrate setting in the 4E-BP1 primary cells. And what we saw in that context was that kind of the same thing what we saw with 4E-GI1 and 4E-2R-CAT, in that we see an increased sensitivity in the castrate setting. So I think there is a certain amount of reprogramming that probably happens there without AR, and it probably puts the two cells back in like equipoise, and one's not more dependent than the other.
Okay, one more. Let's do one more. We're ahead.
So I was just curious, is this specific to tumor cells, or do you see it in normal cells as well, this sensitivity to AR?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the thoughts that I've had is like, why does this even exist, right? Why does AR negatively regulate, translation? And so there was actually a really interesting paper from the Kennedy Lab at the Bucks Institute. It was published fairly recently, where what they found was that male mice, basically if you give them a high-fat diet, 4E-BP1 levels go way down, okay? Now, what I thought was really interesting in that context, if you then go ahead and overexpress 4E-BP1 in that mouse model, it becomes completely resistant to that high-fat diet. But it's interesting, you do the same thing to a female mouse, that doesn't happen. So one of my thoughts here is maybe that's one of the reasons why there are these, basal metabolic differences between males and females that's regulated through this interplay between the two. But that's just a hypothesis at this point.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much. And